Beri. As we mentioned before, I have 30 years experience starting companies, running my own family businesses, and I am currently growing my fourth company. That organization is called Peak Alliance. We invest in people and companies. My co-founders are in the room, Ronald and John as well. We mentioned them before. It's absolutely a pleasure working with both of you. Again, as Marty mentioned, the reason why we're here is to discuss reproductive health and the opportunities within that area. And that reproductive health also includes men, something that we don't realize and it's important to address. I'm thrilled to be moderating this important topic. This is a conversational discussion. Questions are encouraged. Please put them in the chat. And as Jody had said, we have two panelists. I invite Jody Neuhauser and Dr. Sophia Ononye-Onyia. You'll have to correct that. But it's
we'll just do Dr. Sophia or just Sophia.
Yeah,
make it easy for everybody.
You're like Dr. Oz.
Hey, Dr. O.
Oh, Dr. O, Dr. S. Oh, exactly. With this particular topic, Dr. O could be interesting. And so I now am handed over to have Jody and Dr. Sophia to introduce themselves and to talk about why they are here and a quick summary, and then we'll go to the first question.
Sophia, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but hopefully you can feel my energy. Long story short, I was born in Nigeria. I came to the US 20 years ago. Women's health has not only been a personal interest of mine, but professionally it's also been something that I wanted to pursue. And part of that was just to raise awareness of what some of you might know, which is the simple fact that even though women make up roughly 51% of the population, there's still less than 4% or so of investment dollars that go into women's health. And I wanted to play a role in innovation. So I spent a few years in school, over 12 years or so on my education and training, and it culminated in my postdoctoral training at the Yale School of Medicine, where I focused on triple-negative breast cancer research. And for some of you in the room who may know this, but triple-negative breast cancer predominantly affects African-American women. And despite that, it's the most aggressive form of breast cancer, and most of the women that die of triple-negative breast cancer are under 40 years old. And so for me, it was about innovation. But I quickly understood that innovation is not a one-person job. It's something that we all do collectively. And as great as science was, I just absolutely hated being in the lab. So I wanted to take that knowledge of science and apply it in a more entrepreneurial way. And long story short, I founded my company, the Sophia consulting firm, and we bank certified women-owned consulting firm that focuses on scientific communications. And I think it's very important, especially in this era of fake news and such, to have a credible source of scientific content. So what was important for me midway through the pandemic was to sort of showcase credible scientific content as a time when we were almost becoming a mockery in terms of where do you get credible information from. So I launched my firm's Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast in June 2020. And we've been fortunate to have visionary leaders, influential leaders, including the CEO of the American Cancer Society and the chief medical officer of WebMD and the CEO of Bio and such. But I think having those type of industry leaders come together has been great. But for me professionally, I joined the board of a publicly traded women's health company called Beri Bioscience last year. And it's been great to sort of advise the company behind the scenes. And then in my day-to-day job as the founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm, to also work with other women's health companies to see how we can advance the state of science, how we can speak in a way that is more compelling, how we can improve and increase women leadership. And a point that Yvonne made earlier, how can we bring in men as allies and also emphasize the importance of men's health and the role that men play in advancing women's health. To me, it's about, a collective meeting of the minds. It's about diversity of thought and perspective. And I could talk all day, but the beauty of it is I know when to shut up. Nice.
Cool, thanks, Dr. Sophia. I'm Jody Neuhauser. I'm the CEO, co-founder and CEO of Ovaterra, and we're building the first clinically backed vertical fertility and reproductive health marketplace. It's based on a business which is also driven in the supplement space, which we can get into. Like Dr. Sophia was talking about, the importance of science, we have 10 patents. All of our whole process is about bringing education and information through our tech platform and our recommendation engines, which are driven by our proprietary AI algorithms, which are then which are informed by clinical practice. So we can get into actually kind of how it all works, but for us, it is all based in science, and it's about helping consumers, or a consumer-facing platform, consumers understand what are those products and services that are out there for reproductive health, specifically for men and women, that are science-backed, that do have validity and effectiveness behind them, so that we can eliminate the kind of 2 a.m. rabbit holes where people are just trying to find something to help with their reproductive journey. So we're excited to be in this space. I love being a female founder in this space. It's a rising tide lifts all boats. I've founded a number of companies in other markets, and this is the first time I've worked in a very collaborative environment where we're not competitive with each other. We all realize it's the more we all can innovate, the problem is big enough for all of us to be there. And part of the reason we exist is because there has been so much interest and so much development in women's health, that now there's a lot of point-to-point solutions, and the industry is starting to get really fragmented. So we see the opportunity as the first aggregator in the space to start to bring all of that great innovation together.
Yvonne, can I make a comment?
Please.
So Marty and I had breakfast a few weeks ago, and we're talking about latest developments, what's going on, and I think that's where I mentioned the FemTech. So I haven't had the chance to meet with Dr. Sophia and Jody. So what's exciting for me, I've been practicing patent law for about 25 years, work with a lot of family offices to get the company's money and things like that. But I mentioned yesterday that a lot more female VCs are coming into the market, which is great for me to see. I have a wife and 2 of my 4 kids, my daughters. But some really interesting developments on female founders, which is really exciting. So for yourself and everything that's going on. So two companies that come to mind. One is the female. It's many people may be familiar with cord blood, all the stem cell technology and excitement about that. I have a group out of LA that is working on female menstrual waste, the cord blood, the stem cell technology behind that. A lot of data analytics. Once you get the data, then determine the benefits of it. You have to break it down by age, background, all that information. So that's female. Going to be female funded, and it's also female founders. That's very exciting. Then there's several doctors, cardiologists on the east side, another female founder group out of Michigan. So it's really one of the reasons I'm happy about this conversation is it's a growing area that's really important. And second one, as far as both of you mentioned men, there's a spin out from University of Utah that's working on stem cell technology to create sperm cells from both infertile and fertile men, and getting a lot of funding. So it's a very interesting area. And thank you for mentioning men and their role in this, because I always say to women groups, don't keep the men out. We're not bad. So thank you for that.
Well, I think it's a lot. I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is that, especially in reproductive health, it's actually, research shows that it's a third women, a third men. So a third a challenge with the sperm, a third a challenge with the egg, and a third a challenge with the combination of the sperm and the egg. And Dr. Shauna Swan, who's up at the University of Columbia, her book, Countdown, she just released it. And there's a very scary stat in there, which basically says by 2045, based on all of her 18 years of analysis, half of all couples will need help getting pregnant in the in the world. And sorry, guys, it's actually mostly driven by sperm health, which is driven by environmental factors. So we can't ignore the guys, because then none of us are going to be able to get pregnant.
And environmental health as well.
Yeah.
It's really important. And so, any other thoughts?
No, please.
No,
Just wanted
very
to jump in. Yeah.
So just to put a little lightness onto this topic, Jody I want to ask you, Jody, to share how you got started in this industry, like what inspired you,
to get going. Yeah.
To get
So
going.
I'll
Or South African story.
I have an interesting South African story, which is will probably someday be a romantic comedy, which is why it lightens the mood, I think, in panel discussions. But essentially, I was living in New York for 15 years. I was biohacking my own fertility. I was an Ironman, and while I was training for the Ironman, I had a coach, I had a nutritionist, I had a dietitian, I had like lots of different. But I was also at the same time, 35, and the dating scene in New York sucks. So I hadn't met anybody, and my sister is married to a South African, and so I just said, let me look at freezing my eggs just to have that fertility preservation option. So it's actually a third of the cost to freeze your eggs in South Africa versus in New York City or in any large major city in the United States, and that's a second separate company that I've started, actually helping women go from big large cities in the U.S. to freeze their eggs in Cape Town. And it's all mostly driven by pharmaceutical pricing, but that's a different conversation. So I went to South Africa to freeze my eggs, got on Bumble just to meet someone to have a beer with. And little did I know that the guy who I met on the night of my trigger shot for my fertility journey would be now my husband. So cool. It is my worlds are slightly intertwined. But it was such an interesting journey for me, and I went through so many changes from a lifestyle factor perspective, and really just had all these discoveries around, what do you mean my laundry detergent is affecting my reproductive health? What do you mean my lotion is affecting my reproductive health? How come I don't know this? Why is there all this research out there and none of it's in clinical practice? And turns out, and Dr. Sophia, I think you could probably talk about this, but that delay between kind of research and implementation into clinical practice, and that's exactly where we are right now, in especially things around environmental factors affecting reproductive health. So I just said, this is ridiculous. I spent more than $5,000 and more than 800 hours combing through, like, what's the best sunscreen? What's the best this? What's the best that? What tests do I need to take? What supplements do I need to take? Like, how do I literally put my system, my holistic system, into the best shape possible to freeze the highest quality eggs possible? And then I'm like, this is stupid. Like, I'm a professional career woman, and I don't have time to do this, and neither do any of my friends, and they all have disposable income. So clearly there's a market out there to build this technology and to make it easier for everybody.
Yeah, Dr. Sophia, you have your thoughts on this?
Yeah, always. So for me, as I mentioned earlier, I think that growing up in a developing country, for me, was West Africa, not South Africa. But growing up in Nigeria, I just didn't like the fact that a lot of women didn't have a voice or just ownership of their bodies or control of what happened to them. In addition to that, roughly 250,000 African women die during labor every year. And that's a statistic that is often not amplified enough. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why I launched my Amplifying Scientific Innovation platform. And I believe that everything that you can do to advance the state of science, to advance the state of healthcare, whatever it is a step forward. So for me, I have taken into leveraging media, whether it's social media, traditional media, or online media. And I mentioned my podcast earlier. So during Women's History Month, what was that, last month? Gosh, we're in April already. I was able to feature 3 of the leading women's health companies in the space, starting with what might be one. Well, on a personal note, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the public board. So I featured a company called Beri Bioscience, they're a leader in women's health innovation. But what's interesting about Beri is the fact that Organon actually invested roughly $10 million upfront, and obviously there's a whole other package around commercialization and such. But the investment was to look at bacterial vaginosis, which affects roughly 20 million US women alone. And Organon is also interesting because obviously their market cap is roughly $7 billion. And for women's health, that is almost unheard of, to have that much money, not just to spend on yourself, but also to invest in licensing deals and such. Another company that I featured on the podcast is a company called Obsiva, and Organon invested roughly $25 million upfront. There's a lot more money in the commercialization package as well. And this is looking at preterm labor. And the data for preterm labor is around, I think 15 million or so children are born prematurely each year. And obviously, if you're born prematurely, it keeps you at a higher risk for a number of different disease conditions, including asthma. So I didn't mention my education. I think to me, it's like over the course of your conversation, you can weave that in. but something that's always been interested in for me is public health. So I have a master's degree in public health, in addition to a PhD in medicinal and natural product chemistry, and MBA, my postdoctoral training, and all that good stuff. But the reason why I mentioned the MPH is while I was getting that, I was a project coordinator for the Hospital Council of Northwest Ohio. We won't talk too much about Ohio, but what's important to highlight is that roughly 17.5% of babies that are born in Lucas County, Ohio, are actually underweight. They weigh less than 5.5 pounds. And this is the US data. This is not, Rwanda. This is what's happening here in America. So when I think about health equity, it's easy for us to often think globally, the usual suspect, developing countries and such, but I think there's a lot going on here within the US. And what to me has become sort of a personal and professional interest is around access to innovation. No matter how great innovation is, if we don't have access to it, we don't know about it. What Jody's company is doing is exceptional. I looked at your website, but what the gap, the knowledge gap here is that, do you know? Do you even know about reproductive technologies? And if you know, do you have the insurance as we talked about, Yvonne? Or do you have, and a lot of what goes on to IVF, for example, are out-of-pocket costs? Do you even have the money to do that? So I think, investors tend to look at quick wins, and that's important. But also, you are a person outside of what you might do professionally. And if you don't think that, preterm labor matters, or bacterial vaginosis, chlamydia, syphilis, whatever the case might be, if you're not paying attention to those things, somehow it creeps up in your front window, and you don't want all of that. So I think we need to pay attention to what's going on around us and to think in a more collective way around investment. It's not just pure dollars, and it's hard to see investments in that way. But in an age of ESG and such, I think it's important to have the non-financial factors and how we can continue to support and invest in women's health and, of course, men's health.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Sophia, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think one of the impetuses for me to start this company was that I come from a family of farmers in South Dakota, and the fact that I was living in New York City and I had access to a functional medicine doctor, and I had access, and I had insurance, and I have all of these things. I mean, my cousins live on our family farm, which is 60 miles away from the closest place to buy milk. And they're literally growing the food that we eat every day, and they're living paycheck to paycheck and having the same reproductive challenges that, rich people are, frankly, in the coastal cities and the big cities of the United States. And so for me, it's really important to build a platform that anyone can access, and we can provide that information and that education and that personalized guidance to someone at all kinds of different price points, including a free price point. So, I do live chats with our customers every day. I run a lot of our customer service, and the questions that you get from, the smallest town in Alabama, where a woman doesn't have, we spend billions of dollars in the United States to teach people how not to get pregnant, and we don't actually teach them. We spend almost no dollars helping them once they have challenges. And so you have this huge fertility education kind of gap in the United States, and frankly, it's only going to get worse, I think, with what's coming this summer for reproductive health. So the more company that it's really exciting to see so much. Look, it's still not enough money. It's still a very, very small piece of the VC pie, for example, that's going into women's health. At least we're getting some things, but the things that are going into that are getting investment in, especially, I can only speak for the reproductive health space, are things that are all around IVF, and IVF is only accessible to 5% of the population who needs it, and it only works 20% of the time. So great funds in New York, just led a big $20 million investment, Series A, and an AI technology to make IVF more effective. Well, that's great, but has nothing. It's only this many people can access it. Mm-hmm. And so I think the big investment opportunity, and why I'm so excited and will spend my whole career in this space, is there's just so much untapped potential for the much larger market.
So what's the average, what is the size of the IVF market from a revenue point of view? Is the average treatment 5 treatments, $50,000?
Yes, the average
1 million people a year get it. I mean, what?
Yeah, so there's 450 IVF clinics in the United States. There is a huge supply problem. There's not enough REIs graduating, reproductive endocrinologists graduating from medical school. So we are going to continue to get squeezed on the supply issue. A lot of fertility clinics are pulling their as much as they can legally. They're giving that to nurse practitioners and and other staff to be able to serve more patients. the average IVF cycle is about 20 grand. You need 3 IVF cycles to have a decent shot of getting a child at a young age. So under kind of around the age of 36, you need probably 4 or 5 if you're looking at over the age of 40.
So you're talking about $60,000.
You're talking about $60,000 to $100,000, and
which is way out of reach for
Most-
anybody but the
most people.
most people, yeah, exactly. And the good news, I mean, the great thing that Progeny did, Progeny was the first reproductive health company to go public. They went public 3 years ago, I think. Kindbody is pretty close there. I think if the IPO market was better, they would be, you know, on the table. But they are also leading the charge. Carrot is leading the charge. So we have some good comps in the market that are plowing through the headwinds for us. And all those companies are focused on access to fertility employer benefits. So they're all employer benefit companies that are providing fertility care through employers, which obviously the more people we get, you know, to have coverage through their employer, the more people have access to IVF. But there's a lot of people who culturally can't access IVF. They can't use it, whether depending on their religion or what their background is. And so there's an IVF market, which is about $50 billion globally. So it's nothing to sneeze at. But there's also a huge kind of untapped, just general reproductive health market. And then, you know, as Dr. Sonia was saying, or Sophia was saying, like, you've got all kinds of you've got menopause, you've got premenopause, you've got, you know, people who deal with things in their 20s, you've got, you know, all the things around pregnancy. I mean, the fact that it is more dangerous for me as a woman to have a baby in the United States than it is dangerous for me to have a baby in a private hospital in South Africa is frightening.
So a $50 billion marketplace at $50,000 a pop is only 1 million people.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
Right.
Yeah, there's not a lot of people who are accessing IVF, and there's a lot of investment.
You and I spoke
going
about
into
this on the phone, where we talked about how international adoption is gone.
Super hard. Yep.
Right. So it's I think only Guatemala is allowing it now. So you know, this reproductive issue actually has become it's a hot potato in the US.
It's huge. I mean, not to mention what's happening with the Supreme Court and all the laws that are happening in 24 states that, you know, you won't necessarily have access to some forms of reproductive care. So it's a hot button issue in that space. It's a hot button issue in that women and men are both waiting later to have children. 20% of women in the United States will have their first child after the age of 35. And so that means that automatically it gets harder. So the longer you wait, the harder you get. By the time you get to age 40, you only have a 5% chance of getting pregnant naturally every month. And so you got all these headwinds that are coming together going, oh my God, this is going to be a big issue.
Is there a regulatory issue though? Like if you you have a process, you have a platform, can you roll it out to other countries? Are there regulatory issues around it? Can you talk about that?
There's not a lot of regulatory issues. One of the challenges the industry is facing is that it needs a bit more regulatory oversight, in the sense that fertility clinics are not regulated by any kind of legal regulations, I guess. We've seen a lot of lawsuits, probably in the Daily Mail or the, you know, Times or whatever, around fertility doctors in the 60s and 70s and 80s implanting women with their own sperm because they weren't sperm donors.
Yeah.
Like, and through things like 23andMe, people are realizing that, like, hey, I have 23 brothers. How did that happen? Oh, we all use the same fertility clinic, right? So it wasn't an issue in 1960 when no one was able to check their genetics, but now, like, everybody can figure that out. So you've got that happening. You've got believe it or not, which is really scary, there's no technology, or there's a few technologies now, but there hasn't been any sort of actual technology to track embryos. It has literally been like people writing in pencil on the outside of the vial, going into a liquid nitrogen to be frozen. And so there are some companies that are just helping with that kind of operational challenges within fertility clinics.
Blockchain opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a company called Tomorrow, which I would also put on your radar. They've raised a couple of really big rounds, and they're using blockchain technology to track embryos.
You know, UVA, OOVA?
Yep. UVA is also, I'm good friends with Amy, and they're on our platform as well. They're doing
friends on their board. So
yeah, they're doing multiplex at-home testing of LH and PG, so progesterone, for tracking your ovulatory window.
Yeah, when's the right time?
Yeah. But this is what we find out.
extend into wellness as well?
Does FemTech extend into wellness? Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I think Dr. Sophia can speak to this too, but I think for us, we see ourselves as the first female fertility, or not female only, but fertility lifestyle brand. it's a kind of a weird conundrum. You wouldn't necessarily think of a fertility lifestyle brand, but we know that there's more than 70 factors that influence your fertility, and most of those are lifestyle factors, so related to general wellness. So your weight, your exercise, your mental health, your nutrition, are you smoking or not? All of these kind of general wellness factors. And so that's how we see ourselves, is actually as a fertility wellness brand.
At the age of, I think, 45, my wife wanted to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, 5% chance to do it the old-fashioned way. We went to a fertility doctor. It took 4 tries.
Yep.
We had to buy the eggs, and I think 20 years ago it was about $70,000. Not covered by insurance.
Yeah, that's a very typical story, and that hasn't changed much in 20 years.
I have friends
Around
who
here, all those services were available though.
Yeah, in New York.
I have friends who paid $250,000 for their designer baby.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's, and I mean,
Babies, twins.
if you look at the rise, the rise of parenthood in the LGBT community, especially once gay marriage became legal in the United States, parents felt more comfortable or couples felt more comfortable becoming parents because parenthood rights were more defined and things like that. And so you have a rise in the LGBT community of those couples wanting to become parents. Obviously, male couples need a surrogate to carry, and there's a company called Nodal, which is bringing technology to the surrogacy market. The surrogacy market hasn't been disrupted in 30 years. It's literally run on Excel sheets, but the supply there is extremely constrained to the point where people are now paying $75,000 to $125,000 just to jump the line in the for a wait. So it's a 12 to 18 month wait for a surrogate, and people are paying this like VIP fee to jump the line to have their babies.
Wow. That's in the USA.
Yeah, in the US. Yeah.
So I would like to give Sophia a moment to speak, but I just wanted to address the fact that we're talking only about medical strategies right now, IVF and other medical processes, but actually your platform incorporates nutraceuticals. And nutraceuticals where it's not regulated in the United States. Oh, and your nutraceuticals are patented as well.
Yeah.
So in Europe, they're prescription, and in the United States, they're not. But it is important to mention that they're nutraceuticals and how they complement or can be in lieu of IVF.
Yeah, I think so. What you have to prepare. The body is a system. We talk about reproductive health as you're trying to launch a rocket to the moon, and there's hundreds of systems that have to work right all at the same time in order for that to work. And so IVF is literally the end result, or conception is kind of the end result of a much larger process. It takes 90 days for an egg to develop, and about 70 days for sperm to develop in reproductive medicine. And so we know that over that process, you can actually have an impact on the health of the egg, the health of the sperm, the health of the ovarian environment, the health of the overall systemic environment in your body. And so we use nutraceuticals to kind of balance some of those things out. And I can go deeper in depth if anyone's interested. But for us, it's about just helping people understand how to get all those systems running in the best way in order to give you the best chance to get pregnant naturally. And I think what I love about what we do is about 90% of our education platform and products are used post reproductive health. So you find out things about your genetics that yes might help you in your reproductive journey, but ultimately you use that information to make decisions for the rest of your life.
And there is a whole selection for men as well. This is not limited. There's a whole nutraceutical selection there. And
what you see now is just the nutraceutical side of the business, and over the course of the next 8 months, you'll see all the kind of technology pieces start to launch.
And Sophia, through your business, what kind of advocacy work are you doing around this topic, or encouraging across the insurance world?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So my company is not an advocacy organization. It's a scientific communications consultancy. So what my firm does, for example, I'm a Yale entrepreneur in residence, and we have a lot of innovative startups coming out of the Yale New Haven campus. And so the idea is, how do you sort of guide these companies in terms of how they communicate, and communication plays an important role. That everybody thinks they can draft a good press release or they know how to manage a social media, but once you become an organization, I think there has to be a need for structured communications, and through that you're able to do more, that amplification effect, which sort of filters into multiple organizations, right? So I think that when I also think about women's health, I know we've talked a lot about infertility, but that's just a very small section of what women's health encompasses at large. I mean, we're talking about sexual health, reproductive health, we're talking about mental health, social health, etc. So I think for me, my biggest platform, my biggest passion actually will be amplifying the innovation coming from the space. And through that amplification effect, being able to educate the public, I think that's an important part of a mission, because there tends to be a disconnect between the life science industry and the American public. And I think pre-pandemic in 2019, there was a Pew Research study where the pharmaceutical industry was basically the most hated industry in the US. That sort of changed at the start of the pandemic, and now we're sort of back again to that sort of, oh, is pharma good or is it bad? So I don't exist in that sort of black and white area. I think there's so many areas of gray, but a way that for me, I think it's important for us to think about women's health beyond our own personal sphere and more about the future and how we can influence that and impact that. And an area within women's health that is important is around health equity. And for me, if we can innovate more, then the costs go down. Naturally, this is classic economics, right? So I think because we still have limited innovation, then if you think about the addressable market for IVF that we talked about maybe half an hour ago, that market could go up a lot significantly if there was A, more innovation. The innovation will help to drive down the cost, and B, more education. I think that there's a lot that we might be aware of because we're more sophisticated than the average person when it comes to knowing what's going on within the industry. So I think, long story short, it's, for me, advocacy is what you can do on your own, personally, professionally, within your social media, conversations like this, whatever you can do. And I've spoken at universities, I've spoken at medical conferences, there's a website, there's a podcast on YouTube, and we have over 100 million hits on Google. And I'm quite proud of that data, because what it means is that people are paying attention, and that's how you get that amplification effect, through consistency and continuity in the messaging.
I have a question for both panelists. Where should we invest now? What's the opportunity? Like, you have companies or markets, or like, what's an action we can take from this today?
We're raising our seed round, so we can have that conversation.
I'm not supposed to talk about numbers, but her seed is, they're $1 million revenue generating company.
Yeah, so
You already have revenue.
we already have revenue.
Yeah.
We're on track for 1.8.
I met you over a couple of years ago, and you're consistent. I like it.
Good. I like that. But yeah, but I think there's a lot coming up. There's a lot of different stages, so it depends on kind of which stage you're interested in. But I think there's a lot of people who are doing work in the employer. I mean, and I can only speak to the reproductive health side of things.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people doing work in the employer benefit space, which are raising money. There's a lot of interesting work happening in the mental health space around fertility. I'm angel invested in a couple of those companies because I think that's really important, and the effect, we know there's a ton of a mental impact on the productivity at work. So I think there's interesting exit opportunities for those. And then looking at kind of the health equity piece, how do you help more people get a faster access to care or to guidance or to some sort of coaching?
Thank you. How about yourself? Where do you recommend we invest?
Sophia?
Yeah, I think for me, Jody made an important point. You start by what you're interested in. I find, like, if you have a personal interest in something, it makes it easier to pay attention. Otherwise, it becomes transactional. So, I mean, there's some women's health companies that stand out to me. Beri Bioscience, publicly traded company. I sit on their board, and I think the company, and they just partnered with Organon, as I mentioned earlier. And a company that right now, I think the market cap is 20 million, 30 million or so. There's plenty of room to grow. And that can only happen if we have, investors that really care about advancing the state of science. If we have analysts that cover some of these companies, that plays a role. That's advocacy in its own way, because you as an analyst will write about something that you care about. And there are many people that read those reports and would want to learn more about some of these companies. There are smaller companies like Optiva. There is obviously Organon, which is like the giant from Merck, but there are traditional women's health companies that look at a variety of innovation within the space. And reproductive health, infertility is one, but also, as I mentioned earlier, we have preterm labor, 15 million. That's the number that we have, the number of children that are born prematurely here in the US alone. So there's the March of Dimes that focuses entirely on women, actually the children that are usually born premature. So that plenty of things that can be done, and advocating, even what Marty is doing is very important. How do we begin this conversation about femtech? And I was selected as the #1 influencer, digital health influencer in the femtech space by a media analytics group last year. I didn't know people were reading my tweets. I was like, oh, really? I thought, there are certain people that get lots of attention on Twitter, not me. But people read, and I'm proud of that. But long story short, if you like digital health, there are women's health companies that invest in that. If you care about insurance that or gaps, that companies that invest in that. I just had a conversation with a woman that opened up a health equity capital. That's what she called it, health equity capital. And it focuses entirely on addressing disparities in the women's health space, especially for socio-economically disadvantaged people who might not have the access, the knowledge, or the awareness of the actual innovation going on. So do what you love and it won't feel like work. That's my story.
Sophia, just have a question, because I know you're an advocate, but do you ever consider what are mechanisms that can be put in place that would, move this process forward? I mean, I guess I'm just taking John's another step further, which is, he asked, what can I do immediately? But what mechanism could be put in place that might advance this better?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question, right? Because there's what you can do individually, there's what you can do as a group, as a system, etc. But the problem inherently is that the biomasculine industry is one that is not very quick to change. And it's one where we've had the same things done in the same way. If you look at your board, how many women are on the board? If you look at the senior leadership team, how many women are in there? So if we don't have the right representation of people that really care enough to advance and to fight for something, to say, hey, we must do this, then it's very difficult, whatever I'm doing here on my end, to really change that. But what I can do and what I have done, again, through my own platform, Amplifying Scientific Innovation, is to showcase work on YouTube, which is publicly accessible, and to get the views and the accessibility to knowledge through that, but also through me, the work that I do. If you join a board, I'm one of the youngest people and women of color to be part of a publicly traded company. And I know it's sad, and it's 2022 and we're still celebrating those type of data, but that's the truth. So I think if we want change, it has to be a collective and consistent effort. And it can only happen if we ensure the right representation of the people in the room that care enough to advance the dialogue beyond just dollar amounts. That would be what my 2 cents would be on that.
Do you think that retail dialogue, can be as impactful as, kind of at the institutional level? Because I'll give a great example. Some of the strongest women's advocates that I've met, who are like angel investors or super angels, they're here in New York City. There's obviously a big professional class in New York. And then you also have this group in Silicon Valley, which is just a group of Silicon Valley women angel investors. They're all organized. They're like all on, they have a Telegram group. They present all the time. I mean, is it important to get in touch with those people as well as having the YouTube channel?
Oh yeah, it is. It's about who you know. I don't know these people, but I'm happy to know more people. So that's why I'm here speaking to you today, because I don't know everybody in this world, and I do the best that I can with what I have. But hey, knowledge is power, and if you share that knowledge and we connect, I have 15,000 connections on LinkedIn. I should have 150,000. Why stop at anything? So if you have people you think I should know, I'm happy to know them, because the more, the merrier.
Right. So just getting back to John's point, if you have a mechanism that you have thought about or created, it's easier for somebody like me to take that mechanism as an action item to these other groups and say, it's worthwhile for you to meet Sophia because she's created an interesting mechanism that will help move your cause further ahead. So like a great
Yeah.
example, if there was a woman back 10, 15 years ago who had created something called Woman Certified, right? And it was like a product that was certified where women were involved in the development process of the product, right? And I think her name is Delia Passy or something like that out of Florida. And she was heavily promoted by her angel investor, women angel investor here in New York, who was promoting her and taking her around and getting investment for her, right? So I mean, and that was a mechanism to kind of push along the whole getting women involved more in products that are developed for women, right?
Yeah,
So I'm just
no,
saying,
I
if
think,
you have a mechanism in place, it's easier for us to take it around and say, hey, you got to talk to this person. They have this is very
So
interesting.
the mechanism that I have in place shouldn't, I just want to be clear, it's called Amplifying Scientific Innovation. It's one that I have a trademark on. And it's not just the YouTube. And I know there's a tendency for people to say, oh, what is YouTube? It's a joke. And it's not a joke.
No, it's really important.
No, just a
It's really
sec.
important.
So it's the
Yeah.
second most searched, outside of Google. That's actually the second.
No doubt about it. It's really important. I'm just
And
saying,
so may I finish?
what's the next step beyond?
Yes,
YouTube?
and I'm making that point. So the platform for me, that is the video podcast, the advisory work that I provide for companies that range from Pfizer to Biomarine. And my work is not just women's health. I think my training is actually in cancer. I'm a molecular oncologist by training, but I choose to look at different disease states that are of interest to me. So women's health is one of them, oncology is one, regenerative and aesthetic medicine is another one. And the editorials, that work that I do through the Entrepreneur Leadership Network, Life Science Leader, etc., to amplify the knowledge and to reach out to an audience that might not necessarily be on YouTube, might not be a big pharmaceutical company, but might be opening up some of even Inc. magazine or whatever the case might be to learn about knowledge. So if you want to share the information, that's what my platform is. But I don't want to be, I'm not a women's health company, and that's different from what Jody does. My job is in consulting, and while women's health is an area that we address, it's not the only one. And the platform is what's in place to actually amplify the innovation going on within the space.
So, Sophia, what in the chat,
Thank you.
please include your Twitter and your YouTube information so people could copy and paste it in. So easier for people to follow you, especially with your impressive background. John may want to ask another question, but Pete would like to talk about one or two things about his views.
Yeah, so I think what both of you are doing are great. Someone else in the room may know, or on the video, Marty, you may know, but I think I agree with Dr. Sophia where things are not changing as quickly as they should be. But I think, just for an example, I do think they're changing. I think there is an SEC change where requirements of certain public companies, there needs to be at least one woman. So I have some female founder companies that they're forming boards. So rather than just recommend, forgive me for saying the white male, I'm a white male, but I recommended two very strong women in the VC business community to be on the boards. And then I hear plenty of other opportunities. So what I like to do is use the information for both sides to kind of share it and maybe recommend for board positions and or advisory roles or whatever it is, just to spread the wealth. You know, my wife's a labor and delivery nurse. My daughter's a nurse. All the guys, as we continue to emphasize, have a role in this. So to promote this just makes sense to me. So that's the one thing. The other thing I'd say specifically, Dr. Sophia, for you, yesterday I was on the venture capital panel, and one of the speakers on the panel was Aubrey, and she has a particular interest in Africa and related investment opportunities. I know you're not in the United States, but since you were born in Nigeria, there may be a way for you to reach out to Marty and get her contact information, because she was similarly working on some exciting things that maybe you guys could connect with.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's knowledge sharing. Thank you.
Definitely.
Was there another question from the audience?
Oh, yes, John, did you have another question? Yeah.
No.
Okay, so, Sophia, you'll be putting your social media links into the chat. That would be
I already
great.
did.
Okay, fantastic. You're super fast. That's impressive. Good. And any last points that you would like to make about your platform? Maybe the type of nutraceuticals for men and how that impacts the men's health, and some nutraceuticals for women in the natal portion of it, or
Yeah, I would just say we tend to not emphasize nutraceuticals as part of our business, just because we are a tech platform and we make money on nutraceuticals, but we also make money on lots of other revenue streams. But yes, we do have products for men related to sperm health, and then our products for women are patented. We're the only one out there who sells DHEA specifically for fertility. We are the only ones who have a prenatal designed specifically for women 35 to 39 that includes DHEA, and that's where our patents sit. But yeah, I would love to connect with anyone who's personally interested as an angel investor, as a family office, has other people who are interested in jumping into the space. We are building out our board and our advisory board as well. So if there's any need there or an interest, also open to that. And I can make sure Marty has my contact information.
You have a deck and stuff?
Yeah, we have our deck. We can kind of talk through that. We haven't officially opened the round, but we've got a long waiting list of people to call who said, as soon as it's open, let me know. So
yeah, the only thing I need to figure out is, it sounds like you're more consulting, you're involved in different companies. So what are we investing in? The holding company or
no, we're not actually involved in other companies. So we're like the Amazon for fertility. So we're a platform that aggregates all of the information. So we think about us like the wire cutter for fertility, or this kind of a comparison platform that is we have a proprietary recommendation engine that matches you to the products and services you need based on where you are in your journey.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you do anything with adoption?
It's part of one of our services. So one of our category is kind of services. So we don't do any medical care. For example, we refer out to Parsley Health and others that are providing actual medical care. We don't cross that line. And adoption services, surrogacy services, things like that. Those are all categories which will evaluate those providers and provide recommendations in that space.
I mentioned that because my wife's pregnancy was so miserable, we adopted the second kid from all places, Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay. Yeah, it's becoming very, very, very hard on the adoption side of things. But we're focused primarily now on this consumer thing and the consumer focused, and then we'll expand from there into services and lots of places.
Awesome.